I had the cops called on me for parking on my own ranch. Not trespassing, not stealing, just parking. It started when the president of the local HOA stormed up my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard army in tow, ready to declare war on my old F-150. She claimed it was ruining the neighborhood's appearance. Now, keep in mind that this was my driveway on my 50-acre ranch. But here's where things took a beautiful turn. She had no idea who was about to show up behind those flashing lights. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, because this story proves karma sometimes wears a badge and calls you dead. It all happened one Tuesday morning in July. Nothing unusual at first. I had just wrapped up an overnight shift fixing some faulty wiring over at the Johnson farm. I ranch during the day and do electrical work on the side. It's how I make ends meet. As the Texas sun started climbing, I pulled my rusty but reliable 20-year-old F-150 up to the entrance of Harrison Ranch, my land, my pride, my sanctuary. 50 acres of hard-earned sweat, bought years ago with my late wife, Mary. I stopped at the gate to check the mail like I had every morning for 2 decades. My truck's engine ticked as it cooled, and the distant sound of cattle lowing gave the whole morning a peaceful hum, until I heard a horn, a blaring, aggressive horn behind me. I turned to see a spotless white Mercedes pull up just inches from my bumper. Out stepped none other than Karen Whitmore, president of the Pinehurst Estates HOA. Now Pinehurst is that fancy neighborhood that borders my rancho, full of big shiny houses, perfect lawns, and residents who act like one wildflower out of place's a state emergency. Karen strutted over in her blazer and heels like she was commanding a parade, flapping her clipboard like it had authority from heaven itself. "You can't park here," she screeched. Her voice could have shattered glass. "This violates HOA aesthetic standards under the Extended Boundary Resolution." I glanced around at my land, trying to hold in a laugh. "Ma'am," I said, pointing at the weathered old sign by the gate that read Harrison Ranch established 2005. "You realize this is my land, right? Been mine for 20 years. She wasn't fazed. She tore through her papers with the intensity of someone who's never been told number. "I know my HOA rights," she snapped. "According to Resolution 47B, this property is within the Pinehurst Extension Zone. That truck is an eyesore and it's lowering our property values." She was so worked up her hands were shaking, especially when she tried to yank my ranch sign out of the ground. But that sign had stood strong through tornado seasons. It wasn't moving. When she couldn't budge it, she changed tactics. "Sell it to the HOA," she demanded. "I'll even offer a good price. But if you don't, I'll make sure you won't have a choice." Now, I'm a patient man. My son Jake always says I've got the patience of a preacher, and maybe he's right. Raising him alone after Mary passed taught me a thing or two about endurance. But hearing this woman try to take the land where I scattered Mary's ashes, where Jake took his first steps, where we built everything we have, that pushed a button. I smiled wide, real wide, that southern kind of smile that hides just enough bite. "Well, bless your heart," I told her, "but this ranch is my life. It's not for sale, not now, not ever." That pushed her over the edge. Her face went beet red. She yanked out her phone. 911? "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious man trespassing in our HOA expansion zone. He's refusing to leave. He could be dangerous." I just leaned back against my truck and started recording her meltdown. She was spinning some full-on drama, talking about threats and violations like I was a fugitive, not a rancher standing on his own dirt. I shot a quick text to Jake, "Might need you to come by soon." No need to say more. I knew he'd get it. Meanwhile, Karen was practically foaming at the mouth, ranting to dispatch and waving her clipboard like a sword. She used words like aggressive male and immediate threat, all while I stood quietly on my own land. Then we heard sirens. Karen's eyes lit up like Christmas. "You're going to jail for trespassing," she crowed. "You've violated every rule in the book." "I know my HOA rights." 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, already looking tired. They probably handled a dozen Karens a week. But as they walked up, I noticed something. The younger one recognized me. Kept it professional, but the flicker in his eyes said it all. Karen bolted toward them, dramatic as ever. "Officers, this man is illegally parked in HOA territory. He's threatening me. He won't move that junkyard truck." They looked at the truck, then at the Harrison Ranch sign, then at me. It was clear they wanted no part in this circus. As the patrol car door opened again, I looked up, and couldn't help but grin. "Well now," I muttered, "this just got interesting." The officers took my documents, checked everything, confirmed, of course, that I was the legal owner of the land we were all standing on. The younger official, Officer Williams, gave me a subtle smile as he handed my papers back. "Sir, you're clearly within your rights. This is your land. No violation here." "But Karen?" She wasn't backing down. She practically shrieked again. "That truck is ruining our scenic views. It's killing the property value of all Pinehurst estates." Officer Williams responded with the kind of calm only a man who's dealt with home meltdowns can muster. "Ma'am, people are allowed to park their own vehicles on their own land even if it's not brand new." The older cop, Officer Rodriguez, was already edging back toward the cruiser like he'd had enough. But Karen was still going. "I know my HOA rights," she howled for the 5th time. "I'm posting this to the Pinehurst Facebook group. Everyone will know what kind of person you are." I couldn't help it. I chuckled. "Go right ahead, ma'am," I said, casually turning my phone to her. "I've been live streaming the whole thing for Anna Drama Nest." Karen's smug confidence vanished the moment she realized my phone was aimed straight at her. Her face went pale. The viewer count on my live stream had already soared past 5,000 and the comment section was in absolute chaos. "Karen's lost it," one viewer typed. "Somebody get her a manager," said another. After the officers gave Karen a stern warning about abusing emergency services, I made a call of my own. "Jake, things are getting heated," I told my son. "I know you're busy, but," his voice came through, steady as always, "don't worry, Dad, I've got it." I didn't turn the camera toward myself, keeping things discreet, but just hearing his voice gave me peace. Meanwhile, Karen had stormed back into her Mercedes, but she didn't leave. Nope, she sat there, furiously tapping on her phone, probably rallying her fellow HOA Crusaders for round 2. And she didn't waste any time. Over the next few days, she went full-blown obsessive over my truck. She called 911 again this time at 6 in the morning reporting a suspicious vehicle parked in the exact same spot as before. Then she hired some poor soul to photograph every time I dared to leave my truck anywhere on my own land. She even created an online group at Pinehurst against parking violations and somehow it had 300 members by the second day. I'd be impressed if it weren't so ridiculous. But the cherry on top? She had a teenage boy, probably just some neighbor's kid, to hand deliver a letter to me. The poor guy looked scared stiff standing on my porch. Inside was a violation notice. A $500 fine for parking my truck at a non-compliant 90-degree angle. That's right, she had measured the angle my truck was parked at and decided it was 5 degrees off her personal definition of correct. That was the moment I knew it was time to fight fire with creativity. Every Valentine's Day since Mary passed, I'd arranged hay bales in the pasture in the shape of a heart to honor her memory. So, I thought, why not start parking my truck in a heart shape, too? And from there, I got real creative via stars, smiley face as a broken bar. One day I even spelled out Texas using 5 pickup trucks borrowed from nearby ranchers who were now rooting for me. Then came the live stream. I called it Parking with Boba, just me, my old truck, and some storytelling. Before long, it became an internet sensation. 50,000 people tuned in nightly just to watch me park my truck in increasingly outrageous designs. One night, while lining up the trucks in a perfect 5-point star, I told a story. "You know," I said, "I taught Jake to parallel park right here. He wanted it perfect." Said, "Hey Dad, I promise I'll protect this place." Funny how life brings that promise back around. Donations started pouring in. People called it parking art, but to me, it was just another way to stand up for what was mine. More importantly, folks from all over started sending messages about their own battles with power-hungry hoes. We were forming a real community brought together by something as silly, and as meaningful, as where I parked my truck. Then came the smoking gun. Karen sent a letter that finally revealed her true motive. In her own handwriting, she wrote, The ranch lowers the value of Pinehurst Estates. Sell to the HOA immediately. There it was, plain and ugly. This had nothing to do with parking. She wanted the land. My land. That night, during the stream, I held up the letter. "Well folks," I said, "the cat's out of the bag. She's trying to take my ranch and using parking violations to do it." The chat went nuclear. People started investigating. Some viewers even dug into public records. And what they found, Karen had a pattern. The HOA had mysteriously acquired several nearby lots over the past few years, and that Resolution 47B she kept waving around never filed. It wasn't even legally recognized by the county. The whole thing was as fake as her outrage over my truck. As I set up a new design the next day, this time more elaborate than ever, I shook my head and told my viewers, Jake was right. Sometimes, you've gotta stand your ground, even if it's just over a parking space. Later that night, I gave Jake a call and filled him in. I could hear the pride in his voice, even though he didn't talk much about what he did for work. "I've been keeping tabs, Dad," he said. "But tomorrow, you should bring back up." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. And Karen? She wasn't ready for who was coming. I ended that night's stream with a little teaser, just enough to send the chat into a frenzy. "You've all been asking for it. Tomorrow, I'm bringing someone special. And Karen a broken bar." I paused, watching the flood of wild guesses in the comments. "She ain't ready for who's coming to visit." Just before I hit end stream, I caught something in the distance. Karen's face, lit by the glow of her phone through the upstairs window, watching my broadcast. And for the first time, a broken bar, that smug look of hers faded into something else entirely, fear. The next morning, I made good on my promise. 10 pickup trucks, borrowed from every rancher within 50 miles, lined up across my front pasture. From above, they spelled out, "My land." As the morning sun hit the chrome, it looked like a patriotic billboard that could be seen from space. And right on cue, 12 minutes in, exactly as predicted, Karen called the cops. I knew because my stream viewers had started a betting pool on how fast she'd snap. 75,000 people were watching when the sirens approached. But this time, the officer who stepped out looked completely over it before he even opened his door. "Mrs. Whitmore, a broken bar," he sighed, rubbing his eyes like he hadn't had coffee. "We've talked about this." Karen practically exploded with indignation. "You came because of parking again?" he asked. And there she stood, red-faced and frantic, flailing her arms at my display of parking art, shouting as if I'd staged a coup with pickup trucks. "This is psychological warfare," Karen screamed, jabbing a finger at my line of parked trucks. "It's targeted harassment through vehicle arrangement. I know my HOA rights." The officer glanced over the display. Every single truck was legally registered, neatly parked, and well within the bounds of my land. You could practically see him questioning his career choices in real time. "Ma'am," he said, sounding absolutely done with it, "if you call 911 one more time about Mr. Harrison's truck, you'll be charged with misusing emergency services." The chief has made that crystal clear. But Karen was too far gone to be reasoned with. Right there in my driveway, she whipped out a tablet and launched a full PowerPoint presentation. That's right, 47 slides titled, "The Parking Terrorism of Bob Harrison." Slide 23, my heart-shaped truck arrangement from Valentine's Day. She had it labeled, "Emotional Manipulation via Vehicle Positioning." She'd taken photos from multiple angles, added red arrows, and even marked certain spots as aggressive truck placements. The poor officer tapped out somewhere around slide 30, slowly walking back to his cruiser. But Karen? She kept going, turning her tablet toward my phone's live stream and the growing crowd of neighbors who had shown up with lawn chairs and popcorn. Then her phone buzzed. She froze, mid-sentence. She glanced at the screen, and in that brief moment, the steel facade cracked. The text was from someone named Jessica, and it said everything. "Mom, I just saw the live stream. What are you doing? This is embarrassing." Clear as day on the screen. Karen fumbled to hide it, but too late. My stream caught it. Her hands trembled. For just a second, she looked like a person, not a clipboard-wielding tyrant, but a mom, shaken by her daughter's disappointment. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point. But then she stiffened, shook her head like she was swatting away her own conscience, and declared loudly to no one in particular, She doesn't understand. I do know my HOA rights. I'm protecting our community. And that's when Mrs. Georgia Thompson decided she'd heard enough. My 82-year-old neighbor who had lived on this land long before Pinehurst Estates was even an idea stepped out of her old Buick with her walker and marched straight toward Karen. She looked like a woman who had stared down the Great Depression, 2 wars, and every Texas summer since 1948 and still had strength to spare. "I've lived here 50 years, Georgia declared, her voice like thunder, "and Bob Harrison is the best neighbor anyone could ask for." She pointed her cane square at Karen. "He fixed my roof for free after that tornado, brings me groceries when I can't drive, and you're harassing him over parking? You ought to be ashamed." The crowd rumbled with agreement. Even a few folks from Pinehurst Estates started nodding along. Karen tried to argue, but Georgia wasn't done. "You want to know what really hurts property values?" she snapped. "People like you, turning neighbors into enemies over nothing. This ranch is why half these folks moved here to live near real land, with real people." She pointed at my pasture. "Bob's ranch is the community. You're the one ruining it with your silly clipboards and fake rules." I felt something stir inside me as I stood there among those 10 trucks, with my neighbors backing me and thousands of viewers watching live. I turned to the camera. "Right here," I said quietly, "is where I taught my son Jake to parallel park 20 years ago." I let that hang a moment. Then I continued. "But long before that, in 1998, this same spot held another memory. My late wife Mary stood here 5'2", fighting cancer and stared down a big-time developer who wanted to bulldoze this place for a shopping mall. She looked that man in the eye," I said, choking up just a little, "and said, this land will stay in the Harrison family until the sun stops rising." She taught me something that Dia taught me, that the smallest person can make the biggest stand. And even after she passed, I swear her spirit's still here, watching over this ranch. I smiled and looked at the camera again. She's probably laughing right now, saying, Really, Bob, all this drama over parking?" I chuckled at the memory. Jake was 16 when he finally nailed that parallel park, and nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Took him 15 tries, but he got it. And when he did, he looked up at me and said, "Dad, I promise I'll always protect this place." I let the silence linger. The live stream chat exploded. People were speculating who was Jake, what did he do, why did I keep mentioning him? Meanwhile, Karen's face had turned from deep red to ghost white. Even members of the HOA board were starting to mutter, questioning whether this whole vendetta had gone too far. Then, in one last gasp of desperation, Karen announced she was suing me for public disturbance by vehicular arrangement. Yes, that was her actual claim, and believe it or not, her slick-suited attorney, some guy named Steinberg, showed up within the hour to serve papers right there in my driveway. Preliminary hearing, scheduled for next week. Karen strutted around like she'd already won, but then Linda Ramirez, my lawyer, and a former high school classmate showed up. She read through the paperwork, burst out laughing, and said, "She's suing you for creative parking on your own land?" Oh, Bob, this is going to be fun. As that night's stream came to a close, I faced the camera. I knew Karen was watching. So were 90,000 other people. "You all keep asking about Jake," I said, my voice calm. "Tomorrow, at noon you'll meet him." Then I paused, let the moment simmer. "And Karina Brokenbar?" I looked toward her house across the property line. "She's not ready for who's coming." The chat erupted with wild theories, some funny, some serious, and as the stream ticked up past 95,000 viewers, I glanced across the fence line. There she was, framed in her upstairs window, laptop open, watching my stream. And for the first time since this whole circus began, she didn't look angry. She looked scared. The live stream audience buzzed with anticipation, trying to guess what twist was about to unfold. Viewership soared past 100,000 as I arranged 5 trucks into a precise star pattern, the Texas sun beating down relentlessly. Right on cue, Karen showed up, flanked by what looked like every nosy neighbor from Pinehurst Estates. 15 people, all brandishing no illegal parking signs, with a drone hovering overhead like a furious insect. She marched toward me in a stiff, likely brand new power suit probably bought just for this moment, holding a sparkling banner that read "HO Rules" in bold glitter letters. "Bob Harrison!" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the heat. "Today I have 15 eyewitnesses to your parking tyranny. This ends now. I know my HO rights." The drone pilot, a teenager who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, circled above as Karen barked directions like she was producing a true crime series on vehicle infractions. Then we all heard the unmistakable growl of a Dodge Charger turning into the driveway. The chat exploded with energy. "The sheriff is here. Karen's about to get obliterated." The cruiser rolled to a stop, and Karen's face lit up with smug satisfaction. She practically bolted toward the car, heels snapping against the gravel, clipboard in hand. "Finally, someone with authority," she cried. "This man is weaponizing parking strategy. He's tanking property values with psychological truck warfare. Arrest him immediately." She was so locked into her dramatic monologue that she didn't even glance at the officer stepping out. The car door swung open slowly. Out stepped Sheriff Jake Harrison, his badge gleaming under the sun. He looked right at me and flashed that same lopsided grin he'd had since he was a little boy. Then he said the two words that dropped jaws across the entire property. "Hey, Dad." Silence dropped like a curtain. The only sound was cattle munching somewhere in the distance. Karen's mouth opened and closed, stunned, no words forming. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the ground. The drone slammed into a fence post. One of her entourage whispered, "Did he just say Dad?" The chat turned into a blizzard of exclamation points and disbelief. "Wait, what? That's his son? Plot twist of the year." "No way." I caught a glimpse of Karen's hand-picked witness as Mrs. Peterson from the HO board clutched her sign like it might protect her. The Johnson twins slowly lowered their phones and began inching back toward their vehicle. Even the drone kid, who couldn't have been more than 19, was furiously texting probably calling his mom to come get him. Across the street, neighbors were glued to their windows. Some had their phones up, capturing every second. Old Mr. Franklin even wandered out in his robe with a mug of coffee and gave me a proud thumbs up. Karen finally found her voice, but it was a squeaky whisper. "Dad, number, that can't be." "My HO writes a broken bar." "Yes ma'am," Jake replied, his tone slipping into official mode. "I'm Jake Harrison, sheriff of this county, and Bob Harrison is, indeed, my father." He paused, scanning the trucks, the stunned crowd, the wrecked drone, and Karen's horrified expression. "Now, can someone explain why my department has received a dozen complaints about my father parking on his own land?" He pulled out his notepad, barely hiding a grin. "According to our records, Mrs. Whitmore, you've contacted emergency services 12 times in the past month, each time about my father's completely legal truck positioning. Last week, a real burglary response was delayed because units were sent here to investigate what was described as a broken bar, aggressively angled parking." Karen turned pale, then green, stumbling backward as if his words physically struck her. "This is a conflict of interest. Corruption, nepotism," she sputtered. "I'll report these to the state, the FBI, anyone." Jake remained calm, but his eyes flashed just like when he was a kid standing up to bullies at school. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've never personally responded to a single call involving my father. All were handled by other deputies. I'm only here now because I came to have lunch with him off duty. But now that I'm here, I'd love to look over the documents you've been so eagerly waving around." He gestured to the clipboard lying in the dirt, then took out his personal phone. "Because I've been doing a little digging myself." His expression hardened as he scrolled through files. "Turns out, you've been funneling HO funds into false documents about surrounding land deals. That resolution you keep citing, a 47-BA, was never officially filed. It's fake. What is real is the $1.5 million that mysteriously vanished from HO accounts, exactly the amount needed to purchase the properties circling my dad's ranch." The crowd gasped. Karen's loyal followers began to step away, suddenly uncertain. Someone muttered, "This is not what we signed up for." The drone operator had already started packing up his gear. One of the truck drivers had already started packing up his gear, quietly edging toward his vehicle when Jake's voice rang out. "You tried to force my dad off his land so you could scoop it up cheap and resell it to developers," he said, locking eyes with Karen. "That's conspiracy to commit fraud." Mrs. Whitmer, and that's only the beginning. Jake turned toward the crowd and the live stream camera, his tone shifting. I first understood what real anger felt like when I was 8, he began. A man came onto our ranch and told my father he didn't belong here, said his truck was too old, his clothes too worn, his ranch too plain for the neighborhood. He glanced briefly at me, then right back to Karen. I watched my dad's face as that man tried to belittle him for earning his living with calloused hands, for being a real Texan and not the kind that plays pretend. That day, I made myself a promise. I'd stand up for good people against bullies who misuse power. He took a step forward. Looks like I'm keeping that promise. Karen made a break for her Mercedes, but Jake raised his hand calmly. Oh, and Mrs. Whitmer, we're not done. When you steal money to buy land under the table, a broken bar. He paused, checking a message that buzzed onto his phone. A broken bar. And when your friend at City Hall, Patricia Harris, agrees to testify about the bribes you paid to push through bogus documents, so you might want to call a lawyer. Karen's complexion drained to white. The live stream was now peaking, with over 150,000 people tuned in. Hashtags like #ParkingDad and #SheriffSon were exploding online. Then Jake landed the final punch. By the way, those 5 trucks you're so upset about? He pointed over his shoulder. They're all legally parked. Perfect 90-degree angles. I measured them myself. He gave me a quick wink. Learn from the best. I couldn't help the pride swelling in my chest as I looked at the man my son had become. The stream chat was absolutely melting down with reactions. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she was about to collapse. But this story was far from finished. 3 days after Jake exposed everything, Karen retaliated under cover of darkness. The low roar of diesel engines and the harsh beep of backing alarms woke me from sleep. I stumbled outside to see 5 enormous semis completely blocking every entrance to Harrison Ranch. The drivers had positioned themselves on public roads, technically legal but completely cutting off access in or out. I had a feed delivery scheduled, and a sick calf that needed a vet immediately. Karen had found a loophole and was digging into it like someone with nothing left to lose. I fired up my live stream and panned the camera across the wall of trucks. Well folks, I said, looks like Karen isn't done yet. Can't say I'm shocked. By sunrise, things had gone beyond petty drama. The drivers, clearly uncomfortable, admitted they'd each been paid $5,000 by Karen to park their rigs there for an entire week. Just doing what we were hired for, sir, one man told me. She said it was a legal protest. But Jake had taught me well over the years about traffic law, property boundaries, and what counts as obstruction. I carefully documented everything for my viewers. How the trucks were blocking emergency vehicle access, violating fire safety codes, and interfering with utility easements. Then I recognized someone. I approached a nervous-looking driver. Tommy Martinez, I asked, didn't you lose your commercial license last year over insurance fraud? Tommy blanched, staring at the ground while I kept streaming. An hour later, Jake showed up, and not as the sheriff, but as my concerned son. Once he took in the scene, he made a few quiet calls to people in the Department of Transportation. Within minutes, Tommy caved. She said she'd cover our fines if we got caught. He admitted on camera, sweating through his shirt, said she had connections, said she'd make any problems disappear. But I can't take another heat, I've got kids to feed. Jake's face was all business. So she hired you, knowing you were driving illegally? He asked coldly. That's conspiracy. Traffic violations, endangerment. Keep talking. Seeing Tommy break, the other drivers started moving their rigs without needing to be told. But Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. That afternoon, she called an emergency home meeting. Over 200 people attended, half of them followers of the ongoing parking saga. I spotted plenty of familiar faces and neighbors who'd watched everything unfold in real time. Karen stood at the podium, a shell of her usual polished self. Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared, eyes wild with fury. This man, she snapped, jabbing her finger in my direction, has made a mockery of our peaceful neighborhood. He's tanking our property values with these ridiculous parking stunts. But before she could continue, Patricia Anderson, a long-standing Pinehurst resident, stood and interrupted her. Actually, Karen, she said evenly, I just spoke with 3 different real estate agents this morning. Home values in Pinehurst have gone up 15% this quarter. They said it's because Harrison Ranch gives the area an authentic country feel. That's what buyers are looking for. She folded her arms. You're the one dragging down this community with your personal crusade. The room erupted into shouting of board members yelling over each other, neighbors arguing, total chaos. And then came Karen's boldest move yet. On the security feed in the meeting room, a tow truck appeared hooked up to my F-150 parked right outside. Karen's face lit up with satisfaction as she declared, "There, he's parked in a fire lane." I called to have it legally towed. I just smiled and kept recording. "Folks watching at home," I said, "you're about to witness karma in real time, because that's not a fiery broken bar." "A broken bar lane," I said, walking toward the camera. "That's not a fire lane, it's my designated parking spot as a disabled veteran." I don't talk about it much, but the placard's right there on the mirror, and towing a vehicle out of a disabled veteran's space, that's a whole new level of illegal. The tow truck was already pulling away with my truck as Karen smirked, declaring, "My HOA rights win again." I didn't stop them, just kept filming, recording every second. Jake was off to the side, on the phone with someone, speaking low but fast. Meanwhile, the chat was blowing up, over 200,000 viewers, flooding the stream with outrage. "This is theft. She's completely unhinged." But I kept calm. I knew what was coming. I turned the camera on myself. 20 years I've had that truck," I said, voice tight. "Bought it with Mary, the year we got married. Every dent, every scratch a part of the story of building this place together. But if Karen wants to start this kind of fight, a broken bar," I stared directly into the lens. "A broken bar. She's about to learn why you don't mess with Texas." The home meeting disintegrated into shouting matches. People yelling, arguing, pointing fingers. But I noticed Karen's lawyer, Steinberg, quietly slipping out the back. His face was pale. He'd seen what was coming. That night, I went live again, sitting on my porch with the empty spot where my truck should have been visible behind me. Viewership soared to 300,000 and climbing as word of the truck theft spread across every corner of the internet. Then, just as I was signing off, headlights appeared in the driveway. Not just any headlights, of the unmistakable flash pattern of police cruisers. Jake stepped out of the lead vehicle, 4 officers following him, all business. "We need you to come with us, Dad," he said, his voice official. "You need to identify stolen property." The stream was still rolling as we drove through the night. And where did we end up? Karen's house. My truck was sitting right there in her driveway. I parked next to her Mercedes like a prize. But the real sight was Karen herself, in silk pajamas, fuzzy slippers, and a champagne flute still in hand, clearly mid-celebration. "Karen Whitmore," Jake said as his officers stepped forward, "you're under arrest for grand theft auto. You have the right to remain silent." A broken bar. The stream camera flipped to a doorbell feed. One of my viewers who worked for a home security company had patched me into her security system. As Jake read her rights, my phone buzzed. It was the tow truck driver. His voice shook as he spoke. "Mr. Harris, a broken bar. I'm so sorry. She said you were a squatter." Showed me fake eviction papers. When I saw the disabled vet plate, I knew something was wrong. "Boot to broken bar." She threatened my business, said she'd ruin me if I didn't do it. He sounded like he was crying. "My dad served too." "I'm turning myself in tomorrow. I'll testify. I've been towing for 20 years. A broken bar, never stolen anything from anyone. But she made me a thief." Even the people she dragged into this mess were victims of her lies. Over 200,000 people watched live as Karen's champagne glass hit the marble tiles and shattered. Her scream of "my HOA rights" echoed across the night as the cuffs clicked shut. 6 weeks later, the courtroom was packed, a standing room only. News anchor Sarah Davidson was live streaming for Anna Drama Nest, with over 500,000 viewers watching around the globe. I sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, wearing the only suit I owned. I hadn't worn it since Mary's funeral. Karen entered wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her overdone spray tan. The entire gallery buzzed with whispers until Judge Patricia Hawkins banged her gavel. "Order. This isn't a reality show," she said sharply. "Though, based on what I've read, it's close." Then came the prosecution. led by a no-nonsense attorney named Janet Brooks. Her opening was like a masterclass in controlled destruction. First came a video montage titled Karen's 12 Calls About Parking. The courtroom treated not to laugh, each call more ridiculous than the last. He's parking menacingly. The truck is facing north instead of south. I think the parking pattern is a secret code for drug trafficking. The judge had to call for order twice as the absurdity kept climbing. But then things got serious. Brooks revealed how these fake emergency calls delayed first responders. One domestic violence case saw a 7-minute delay because officers were diverted to check on a supposed aggressive parking job. She paused and let the weight of that statement settle. Then the evidence kept pouring in like a flood of unpaid parking tickets. They presented the forged HOA resolution of 47B. A handwriting expert confirmed Karen had faked signatures from 3 board members. Financial records showed $1.5 million had been drained from HOA accounts into fake shell companies that Karen herself controlled. All part of her plan to quietly buy up land around my ranch. She created a system, Brooks told the jury, weaponized parking complaints to push Mr. Harrison into selling, then intended to flip the combined lots for a $12 million profit. And the knockout blow? Patricia Hendress, Karen's accomplice from City Hall. She had cut a deal for immunity and took the stand visibly shaking. She promised me $50,000, Patricia confessed. All I had to do was backdate some forms. When I hesitated a broken bar, she threatened to leak my son's juvenile record to my boss. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the few home members who'd stood by Karen looked sick to their stomachs. Then my lawyer, Linda Ramirez, rose for our side. Ladies and gentlemen, she said clearly, this case isn't about a few parked trucks. It's about a basic right of the right to use your property without being harassed. She walked slowly past the jury. Mr. Harrison parked legally, every time, on land he owns. In response, Mrs. Whitmore abused emergency services, falsified legal documents, and ultimately committed felony theft. Linda's delivery was clean and devastating. Then she showed the jury photo after photo of my truck arrangements. Hearts for Valentine's, stars for Independence Day, even spelled out Merry Christmas using borrowed pickups. The courtroom fell silent as the images told a story that needed no words. What Karen had once called psychological warfare and parking terrorism was nothing more than a man honoring his late wife and sharing holiday spirit with his neighbors. Then it was my turn to testify. I spoke plainly, from the heart, about the 2 decades Mary and I had spent building this ranch. I talked about teaching Jake to drive in that very F-150. About how Karen first showed up demanding I move and how that tow truck had sat in the same place for 20 years. It's where Mary and I watched the sun go down every evening. I told the jury, it's where I taught my son that sometimes doing the right thing means standing your ground even if it's over something as simple as where you park your truck. Karen's defense, on the other hand, was equal parts theatrical and pathetic. With her original lawyer Steinberg having skipped town, her new attorney tried spinning a bizarre angle, that she suffered from parking anxiety disorder, a made-up condition, supposedly stemming from some childhood trauma involving a runaway shopping cart. The courtroom tried not to laugh. Even the judge chuckled before regaining composure. Counselor, Judge Hawkins said, raising an eyebrow, are you seriously arguing that a fear of parking explains grand theft, forgery, and embezzlement? The lawyer shuffled nervously. Well, a broken bar when you put it that way, a broken bar. But the final blow didn't come from the prosecution, it came from someone sitting in the gallery. Karen's own daughter, Jessica, flew in from California to testify. She took the stand, eyes full of tears, voice trembling. My mom has always been controlling, she said, barely above a whisper. But it got worse after we moved to Pinehurst. She once called the police on me for parking 5 degrees off-center broken bar in our own driveway. I was 17, just learning to drive. The courtroom was dead silent as she continued. The officer who showed up said it was the dumbest call he'd ever responded to. I begged her to stop. Mr. Harrison is a good man. And now she's ruined everything, our name, our family, all because of parking. Karen finally snapped, screaming from the defense table, you don't understand. I know my HOA rights. That truck ruined everything. It was ugly. Judge Hawkins slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed through the courtroom. "Mrs. Whitmore, the only thing being ruined here is your life, and you've done it all on your own." The jury didn't take long. 30 minutes after deliberation began, they returned with a verdict, guilty on all charges, the foreman announced. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, tears of relief. People embraced, others shook their heads in disbelief. Justice had finally been served. The sentence came swiftly: 2 years in prison, full restitution of the $1.5 million stolen from the HOA, 500 hours of community service teaching proper parking conduct at the DMV, and a restraining order. She had to remain 500 feet away from anywhere I might legally park. "This is the most absurd case I've ever presided over," the judge said, shaking her head. "Mrs. Whitmore, you turned a simple neighborhood dispute into a full-blown criminal operation. I hope you use your time behind bars to reflect on how catastrophically you failed, and not just as a neighbor, but as a human being." But just as the bailiffs approached with handcuffs, Karen turned to me with one final, venom-laced warning. "This isn't over, Bob Harrison," she hissed. "I know something about Jake. Check his records from Austin. Parking runs in the family." My smile faded slightly as I glanced at Jake. His jaw had tightened, eyes unreadable. The courtroom buzzed in confusion. Sarah Davidson from Manadroma Nest leaned in toward her microphone. "Well folks, a broken bar looks like this story just turned another corner. We'll be following up." 6 months later, the Texas sun beamed down on Harrison Ranch. 30 trucks and cars rolled in through the front gates for what we decided to call the parking party, a celebration of community, resilience, and the freedom to park your vehicle where it belongs, on your own land. People lined up their vehicles across the pasture, forming one perfect word: justice. Right in the center sat my old F-150, restored, polished, and arranged in the middle of a heart, just the way I used to do for Mary. Sarah Davidson was there again, this time with a full crew from Manadroma Nest, broadcasting live to a now loyal audience. "I'm here at the legendary Harrison Ranch," she said, smiling into the camera, "where a once quiet dispute over parking turned into a national sensation. 6 months ago, HOA President Karen Whitmore filed a dozen complaints over so-called illegal parking. Today, the community comes together not in conflict but in celebration." She paused, then added with a grin, "Sometimes a broken bar parking is just parking, and sometimes it's a revolution." What started as a simple joke from one of my live-stream viewers had evolved into something far more meaningful, a powerful message about standing your ground and defending your rights. "I'm just a rancher who wanted to park his truck in peace," I said, standing on the makeshift stage we'd set up near the barn. The crowd burst into laughter and applause. "But sometimes," I continued, "life throws you a curveball, a broken bar, and karma doesn't just come around, it parks itself right in front of you and calls you dad." That's when Jake stepped up onto the stage, no longer in uniform but in casual clothes, and pulled me into a huge bear hug that sent the crowd into a frenzy. The internet had fallen in love with our father-son story, turning us into an unlikely symbol of resistance and a bit of an online sensation. 6 months ago, Jake told the crowd, "I watched my dad get targeted for doing something as basic as parking his truck. It reminded me exactly why I became a sheriff, to protect decent folks from people who misuse power." He gave a knowing smile before continuing, "And while we're on the subject of justice, let's talk about the so-called parking scandal in Austin." The crowd grew quiet, remembering Karen's bizarre parting words in the courtroom. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "She was half right," he admitted. "I did get a parking ticket in Austin when I was 19, visiting the university. $50 for an expired meter. I was so embarrassed I paid it on the spot, a broken bar, and kept the receipt. For 20 years. He held up the faded slip for everyone to see. "That was Karen's big bombshell. That I forgot to feed a meter once as a teenager." The laughter that followed echoed across the ranch, and I couldn't help but grin. "That's my boy," I said into the mic. "So responsible. He saved a parking receipt for 2 decades. Everyone was laughing, but the real point of the day wasn't mocking Karen. It was about what we'd all built together, a community that stood up, stayed strong, and wouldn't be bullied. Next up was Linda Ramirez, who took the stage holding a beer aloft. "I've been practicing law for 25 years, she said, and I've never seen anything like this. We actually won a case about parking, but more importantly, we proved something bigger. You can't intimidate people out of their homes by yelling about HOA rules." She turned toward me with a warm smile. "Bob, you reminded us that sometimes it's worth standing firm, even over something as small as where you park your truck. So here's to parking freedom." The crowd raised their glasses in a cheer, and I noticed Mrs. Georgia Thompson slowly pulling her old Buick right up near the stage. It wasn't remotely close to a 90-degree angle. "For 50 years I was afraid to upset the HOA," she hollered, her voice strong despite her 82 years. "Now I park however I want, sideways, crooked. Sometimes I take up 2 spots just because I can." Nearby, Sarah Davidson from Drama Nest had pulled Jessica Whitmore aside for an interview. Jessica looked healthier, stronger than she had at any point during the trial. "How does it feel being the new HOA president?" Sarah asked. Jessica gave a genuine smile that seemed to lift the whole crowd. "The first rule I put in place was simple," she said. "No 911 calls about parking, ever. We're Pinehurst Estate, not the parking patrol." She paused for a moment, collecting herself. "I came back from California because I realized this community needed healing. My mother broken bar." She hesitated, then continued. "My mother lost sight of what mattered. She became consumed by control. But that's not what a community is. It's about helping each other, not calling the police because your neighbor's truck is facing the wrong way." The crowd applauded, and I felt a deep respect for Jessica, the young woman who had the courage to stand up not just for her neighbors, but against her own mother. Then, a surprise none of us expected, a courier arrived, carrying a letter addressed to me in handwriting I recognized instantly. Jake opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Mr. Harrison, I'm writing from where I am now to offer a sincere apology for everything I've done. Living in Pinehurst for 25 years made me forget what real community means. I convinced myself that property values mattered more than people, and I was wrong. I've enrolled in anger management classes, and, for the first time in decades, I'm learning how to drive again. My instructor says I need serious work on parallel parking. The irony isn't lost on me. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know I finally get it. You weren't destroying the neighborhood. You were the one holding it together. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore. P.S. I actually understand my real rights now. Turns out, parking where you want on your own land is definitely one of them." The crowd went completely silent, taking in this unexpected twist. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single slow clap started. Within moments, everyone had joined in, not to celebrate Karen, but to honor the possibility that even someone like her could find a path to redemption. As the celebration wound down, Jake and I ended up sitting on the tailgate of my old F-150, watching the sun dip below the horizon just like Mary and I used to do. The truck was parked in the very same spot where it had all begun, where Karen first shouted about HOA violations and property values. "You know, Dad," Jake said, taking a sip of his beer, "when I was 8 and swore I'd protect this place, I never imagined it would mean fighting this much about parking." I let out a hearty laugh that echoed across the quiet ranch. "Life's funny that way, son. Sometimes the biggest fights are over the smallest things, and those small things, they're worth it." As the last guests drove off, their vehicles left tire tracks pointing in every direction across my land. I sat back and took it all in. Half a year ago, I was just a quiet rancher hoping to grab my mail without being hassled. Now, somehow, I'd become a symbol of property rights and standing up to HOA abuse. The live stream audience had rallied behind us. They'd donated enough money to launch a legal defense fund, one that helped dozens of other homeowners push back against overbearing HOAs. All because I chose to leave my truck right where it was. Even Netflix had reached out. They wanted to produce a documentary, The Harrison Ranch Story. I agreed on one condition. They had to promise to park properly on set. As Jake and I walked back toward the house, I turned for one last glance at my F-150, sitting exactly where it belonged. "You can't tow justice," I said quietly, repeating what had become our unofficial motto. Jake smiled and added, "And karma? Well, Sometimes it doesn't just circle back, it parks right in front of you, tips its sheriff's hot a broken bar and calls you dead. The porch light flicked on as we stepped onto the stoop, casting a warm glow over the new sign at the entrance to the property. Just beneath the original Onia Harrison Ranch, established 2005, hung a freshly installed addition, "Parking, free and legal since forever," and just underneath that, in smaller letters, "Karen tested, community approved." Because in the end, that's what this wild ride had really been about, a community choosing to come together and protect what matters, even if that what was just an old rancher's right to park his truck wherever he damn well pleased on his own land. Thanks for watching Anadroma Nest, where common sense takes a backseat and karma drives the show. Like, comment, and subscribe for your weekly dose of mayhem.